But how much calories does your body need? No one talks about that. People just, go onto these low calorie meal plans, because if you restrict your calories too much, there are very severe consequences to that. And it's not just muscle loss. It is also mental health problems and eating disorders as well. So we do have to be very careful. And so I definitely agree with the calories in, calories out to an extent. But what I help my clients do is increase their calories out. Increase your calories out and create a calorie deficit that way. Don't restrict your calories in. And it works wonders.
We are about to launch
Truth Not Trends.
What's up, everybody? We are back. We are not in the basement. We're not in the studio. We're all over the place, man. This is virtual time.
We're on Zoom.
Little Doppler effect.
Today, we're zooming down under, and that's my terrible Australian accent I'll never do again.
Oh my God, that was horrible. That was worse than the Outback Steakhouse guy.
I apologize to all our listeners right off the bat.
I literally didn't even know what you were doing right there for a second. That was, oh my God, that was bad.
All right, we're going to workshop that. I apologize, Australia. I apologize, Jessica. My name is Jesse Schmidt, and I'm over here with my podcast co-host, Liam Bauer, the man, the myth, the legend.
That's right. We are here in Oakland, TNT, baby, bringing you the best in strength and nutrition. This is the podcast where we teach you how to maximize your strength as safely
and efficiently
as possible. That's right.
My name is Jesse Schmidt, and I've been a strength coach for 1,863 days.
Holy crap. And that's over 5 years if you want to crunch the numbers.
Booyah.
I have been a strength coach for 34 years and counting.
That's a lot of years, man. People, today, we're bringing another nutrition-packed interview to you, and this one is with Jessica Turton. Jessica is an accredited practicing dietitian with postgraduate qualifications in nutrition and dietetics and full membership with the Dietitians Association of Australia. Jessica successfully completed her master's in nutrition and dietetics at the University of Sydney in 2017 and was awarded the Faculty of Health Sciences Dean Scholar Award for her double degree. Her master's research project was to conduct a systematic review of all low carbohydrate diets in the management of type 1 diabetes. This review was published in the scientific journal PLOS 1 in 2018.
Yeah, man, this was an awesome episode. We were super excited to get Jessica on. We had to make that crazy across the international Dateline connection.
Worth it.
Yeah, it's 2:00 in the afternoon over there. She's just getting started. It's 9:30 at night, Oakland time. But hey, we're going to go to get some sleep, and we'll be having...
We call it Oakland Central Time.
And we will be having visions of Albus, the dog, running up and down steep hills and low-carb diets in our heads.
That's right. We're going to talk protein. We're going to talk fat. We're going to talk carbs. We're going to talk micronutrients, macronutrients. We're going to talk about disordered eating,
calorie restriction, exercise. Eggs are good for you. All kinds of cool stuff.
Starvation mode. Let's throw that one in there. I don't know if we actually called it mode, but we talked about starvation with calorie restriction.
That's right. We had all kinds of cool stuff.
We got a lot of great things in here. We want to mention a couple of our podcast partners. First one is Low Cal Foods Cali. If you are in Oakland or you're in the East Bay Area in general, they deliver straight to your door. And that's important because you're a busy person and you've got a life to live and you don't always have time to cook dinner. So check out Low Cal Foods Cali. You can go on their amazing app or on their website. They're super customizable meals. They have preset meals you can choose, or you can create your own. You can pick the quantities. You can pick the frequency you want to have it delivered. And the best thing is if you want, you can have your meals delivered to the TNT studio in Rockridge, Oakland, and pick them up from our refrigerator there. And then you get to say hi to us. And we love saying hi to you.
You come on in, you get your workout on, you grab your food on the way, you get an awesome post-workout meal. Don't even have to cook it. It's ready to go. It's fresh and delicious.
Fresh and delicious. And of course, make sure to use our discount code TNT Strength 5 to get 5% off your order. Liam, who's our other podcast partner?
Well, of course, we have to tell you about the Harambe system, which is our favorite band-based fitness system out there. It's the coolest. You got to check it out. You can go to Harambe System and check out their website. Harambe System is basically a band-based resistance system that can simulate any type of barbell exercise you can imagine. It's made in America. It's high quality, stainless steel, high molecular density plastic. The thing is indestructible. You can do deadlifts, squats, shoulder presses, chest presses, curls, shrugs, calf raises, anything you can think of on this thing. We love it. It was created by our friend Khalid Borbeya, aka Boo Robbie. And if you use the code TNT, you can get 15% off anything on the Harambe System website. Go get a t-shirt, get a beanie, get a cool bottle, and grab the K-Bar system, getting the best shape of your life right in your own home.
People, check out those podcast partners and check out this interview with Jessica Turton, dietitian. So yeah, thank you for being here with us. And can you tell our audience who you are and what you do?
Yes, definitely. Well, my name is Jessica Turton. I am a dietitian based in Sydney, Australia. And I'm also a PhD candidate. So I'm in the final year now of my PhD. I'm studying at the University of Sydney. So my PhD topic is looking at low carbohydrate diets for diabetes management. Specifically, we are focusing on type 1 diabetes, but we've done some research in type 2 diabetes as well. And my undergrad at the University of Sydney was in exercise and sports science, and my master's was in nutrition and dietetics. I work as a clinical dietitian as well as doing my research stuff. And I love working with individuals one-on-one. So we really get to get into the nitty-gritty of their diet, what their nutritional issues are, and develop personalized plans. And I've been doing that for over 5 years now, and it's just been such a rewarding job. I honestly don't even feel like I work a day in my life. I feel like everything that I do for work is what I would want to do anyway. I really love it.
If you love your job, you never work a day in your life, right? So that's the way.
Actually, my dad told me that when I was very young, like when I was early teens, and it just stuck with me. And yeah, I feel very lucky to be in a career that I absolutely love.
Yeah, you're in flow.
Yeah, in Australia, is it like over here we have, registered dietitians? So is it the same kind of thing? Like, for instance, if you're a nutritionist, quote unquote, like Jesse and I both are, we're not allowed to prescribe plans specifically, right? Necessarily, we can give, where it's more structure and advice and stuff, but we can't like make a prescribed eating plan for someone and say you must do this because it's outside of our purview. So is it similar to you, like what your credentials allow, the level of which you can engage with your clients?
Yeah. So my degree, the Master's in Nutrition and Dietetics, means that I am a fully qualified dietitian. So I can give personalized nutrition advice and work with individuals who have chronic diseases. But I am also an accredited practicing dietitian. So I think that would be the equivalent of your registered dietitian.
Right.
Yeah. So we're accredited with the National Australian Body for Dietetics. And really the only difference with that, because I can still be a dietitian without that accreditation, but the difference there is you're sort of recognized by Medicare and private health insurers. And so more doctors working in, your standard medical environment would refer to you and you'd collaborate more as a team.
Got it. And perhaps maybe listen to you more readily because you have the right credential.
Yeah. Well, it's not really a credential, it's an accreditation. So as I said, you can still be a fully qualified dietitian without that accreditation. It just really depends on where you want to work and who you want to work with. One of my jobs is at a specialist center. So the center is based on gastrointestinal health. And we get a lot of referrals from GPs in the surrounding area. And so for that type of work, you would definitely want to be an accredited dietitian.
Yeah, Jessica, man, a million questions for you here. But what does the day-to-day work and life of a dietitian look like? I mean, we have many clients. I'd say most of our clients come in. We have a one-on-one personal training studio. Most of our new clients that join up with us have a goal to lose weight. So is it mainly people? I know Australia has almost as high of a rate of obesity as the United States does. I looked that up before this interview. Australia is about 30% and the US is 36%. So yeah, what does your daily work life look like?
Yeah, well, I guess dietitians can work in lots of different roles, but my role as a clinical dietitian is basically, as I said, I do work in clinical practice with a gastrointestinal center, but I also do online consults. I've got my own practice called Ellipse Health. So people from all over Australia can just book in and we can have a Zoom call like this and have a consult. It's really accessible and a lot of people really love that. And so basically what I do is I'm working with the individual. So we basically take a full history in terms of like their health background, their medical conditions, the medications that they take, supplements that they take, their dieting history, because everybody's got a dieting history, right? We look at their blood tests, we look at signs and symptoms, we look at what they're eating, of course. And basically what we do is based on their health goals and the goals that we might set for them as well, we identify their top nutritional priorities. So in dietetics, it's called a nutrition-related diagnosis. And so we figure out basically what are the nutritional issues that are preventing this person from reaching their goals, improving the management of their condition or preventing a condition from developing or losing weight or whatever it may be. And then we basically develop a personalized dietary plan based on those nutrition diagnoses. So it's highly personalized. And what we will do is we'll follow up with that person once a month, maybe more regularly, maybe less regularly. And we want to make sure that the dietary advice we're giving them is actually working. And I think this is one of the biggest problems in the dietetics world. People get a diet plan and then they go off and they do it and they might even stick to it 100%. And it doesn't work for them. So they think they failed. They think something's wrong with them. They give up. They try something new and then that fails. And people can be on this sort of yo-yo dieting bandwagon for years or decades. And what we like to do at our clinic and in our work is really educate people on the foundations of nutrition and give them tools so that they don't need to start a new diet. They have built this foundational nutritional approach that they can take with them for the rest of their lives. So we do a lot of education, a lot of monitoring, a lot of follow-ups. And yeah, that's my kind of clinical dietetics day in the life sort of thing.
Yeah, that's great. It's obvious. Sorry, Liam, I'll let you go. But I want to plug Jessica's Instagram account here because that's how I originally came into contact with you. Jessica Turton _dietitian on Instagram for all of you listeners. Go follow her up, and she puts out really great, informative, well thought out content. So I appreciate you for that, Jessica. You're just putting good information out into the world. Thank you for that.
Thank you.
We love that.
Yeah, I mean, Instagram is interesting because
yeah, we would agree.
I mean, it's a great place to, get knowledge out far and wide and get information out and, even connect with other people like yourselves. So there's so many positives to it. But I think the diet space on Instagram is interesting because everybody wants that like one size fits all.
Of course.
You can see people commenting on my posts, like asking, should I be doing this? What about red meat? What about chickpeas? And people expect that the answer is as simple as like, yeah, that's going to be fine for you. But really, we need a whole consult, maybe an hour, maybe 2 hours to actually know what that individual needs, what's going to work best for them, and what their priorities are. So, I mean, it's a nice environment on Instagram, but you also have to like tread that fine line because I'm always trying to just think about, okay, well, how might all these different individuals interpret the information that I'm sending out? So I want to make sure that it's in an educational way and I'm not being too specific with recommendations.
Yeah, it's very similar with our stuff, although, it has different outcomes and different ways of being implemented. But people just think, there's some magic bullet, right, with exercise as well. There's like they're searching for the perfect plan, and they're missing the principles that really are universal that can be applied to many tools or whatever. But they're searching for, like, if I do this one before that one, is that better? Or if I change the order, or what? Yeah, it's this minor stuff that does nothing, and they get lost in that minutia. It's like the hamster wheel of just circling endlessly and never getting there. And I'm sure it's quite similar.
I sometimes like to mention this client we have who, just for your information, I don't know if you looked us up, Jessica, but we, in our studio, our clients come in, they do a 30-minute strength training workout. They typically do one set to muscular failure, and then they move on to the next exercise. So over the course of a workout, they might do somewhere between maybe like 8 and 12 exercises, single set to failure, and then they go on their way. And they do that a maximum of 2 times per week. So we have a client who I was training one day, and he was just having an awesome workout. And this guy is just like, he's in his, mid 30s, just a stud. Like, like every guy wants to have this guy's body. And he's just like having this amazing workout. And we track everything really meticulously. So I can look up in our cloud software, like what's his best previous attempt on each of these exercises. And he's just crushing every single one. I'm like, what is going on? Why are you having such a great workout today? Because, we expect people to make mostly progress, but not literally every single exercise, every single workout. And he just goes, not doing anything different, just getting good nights of sleep, eating good food, staying hydrated. I was like, those simple things are not super easy for people to adhere to all the time.
Yeah, the 3 things that nobody does well.
Yeah, no, it's so funny because, you're right. People overcomplicate it. And I say this all the time. Like, I've got patients that come in and they've just got these lists of such specific questions. And I'm thinking, how did you even come up with those questions? You must have been diving down rabbit holes on Instagram, Facebook, Google for hours,
right,
reading all these conflicting diet books and blogs and things like that. And people are so overwhelmed, they're actually trying so hard and they're so motivated, but there's so much conflicting advice out there that it's just hard to implement anything. And as you say, it's hard to get those foundations right, like just knowing what nutrients do my body need to survive, number one, what nutrients are going to optimize my health and how much of those do I need? How do I stay hydrated? How do I recover after exercise and stresses and other issues that I have going on? And these are just basic things we should all kind of know, but no one really gets taught. And I think even some dietitians don't even teach their patients the fundamental concepts of nutrition. They can even, overcomplicate things too.
Yeah.
Yeah, absolutely.
And it doesn't help that, the social media sphere and the internet are, where people do a lot of learning and try to do a lot of learning. And even the people who we're supposed to, trust and respect, like medical doctors, are frankly malicious to each other. We have people and I'm curious to get your take on just how, I don't know, the landscape of nutrition on the internet, because I know that's like a really thick onion to peel, but you got like someone who I've seen you post about is like Dr. James DiNicolantonio, right? Who I've read his book, The Salt Fix. Since I've read that, I've supplemented with electrolytes almost on a daily basis and feel great. I'm never dehydrated, all of that. He talks about a lot of research about, how there is maybe a slightly increased risk of mortality for increasing, having above the recommended, daily value of sodium. But there's an even greater increase in risk of morbidity if you're below the daily recommended value of sodium and things like that. And you see, if you're following him on social media, you might see some, other doctors say, this is ridiculous, you're a quack. And it's like, when these doctors are making these types of comments to each other, you just have no idea who to trust as an average person out there in the world.
Yeah. That's why I like working with individuals, because you're in that one-on-one environment where, my patients will come in and they'll be restricting sodium. They'll be cutting out red meat. They'll be limiting their eggs. They'll be cutting the fat out of their diet. and they walk in having a history of heart disease, type 2 diabetes, obesity, like they've got all the problems they've been working so hard to avoid. And in their head, they're still like, oh, but like it's so important that I cut back on fat. It's so important that I cut out salt. And you sort of just give them that time to reflect and say, well, how has that been going for you? Because most of the time, these people are diligently following that standard nutrition dogma, but they're so kind of, I guess it's been so ingrained into them that they've never questioned it. And so when people come into our clinic, we take so much information on their health history and their state of health, and we always relate any advice we give them to something they're experiencing, like signs, symptoms, blood test results, so that when they actually implement this advice that they may feel uncomfortable with. So a good example, you brought it up, is salt. You know, a lot of the times we are recommending our patients increase their intake of sodium because they are severely restricting it and it's actually causing health issues. So when we tell them to increase their intake of salt, they're freaking out. You know, they're so worried about doing it because for decades they've been cutting it out.
Right. And they might have been doing that as a result of a recommendation from a doctor.
Yeah, more often than not, it is from a doctor. And, you know, they're still, you know, we can give them all the education in the world, but they're still apprehensive. But if we tell them what outcomes to track, like keep an eye on your energy levels, for example. When you stand up, do you get dizzy? Do you have headaches? And we tell them what outcomes in their own life to focus on. They implement the strategies maybe just for 4 weeks, and they come back the second time and they're like, wow, this has changed my life. And suddenly they can understand what's important for them. And then we start to break down, I guess, other nutritional myths and things like that. So working with the individuals, it's a lot easier to do it because you can apply it to their everyday life. When you go on Instagram and Facebook and you post something controversial, yeah, you just open yourself up to scrutiny, I suppose, from the other side. And the way that I would do it is I just post either, you know, a nutrition fact, like I do a lot of posts about the nutrient density of different foods, just comparing, say, for example, the micronutrients in animal foods versus plant foods. And then I just leave it there. You know, I don't say too much about it. I don't give my opinion. I just present the facts and then people work it out for themselves. And I think that's a lot of what James does as well, James Nicolantonio. He'll just present scientific information. And if you read his book, he's got thousands of references. He's just quoting the science. He's not necessarily giving his opinion. And then people are able to form their own opinion based on the information they've been given. And look, for some people, that's harder than others. And I still think there's so many different diet plans that individuals can formulate based on the information they have. I don't think everyone has to eat the same way or have the same amount of salt or eat the same amount of protein. I think there is that bio-individuality that's important. But yeah, I mean, you definitely, as a dietitian, are, I guess, facing those nutrition kind of myths every single day. And I found it particularly challenging going through my dietetics training because I was going into that dietetics degree already thinking that eggs and red meat were like health foods and fat was really good for you and low carbohydrate diets, you know, were really effective for diabetes management. I went in thinking all of these things. And when I went into my training, that sort of stuff was basically laughed at. You were considered to be a quack, you know, if you thought eggs or red meat or fats were healthy foods. And so from a young age, I've had to really, I guess, make sure I have a lot of scientific backing to what I'm saying and make sure I'm really careful about the way I speak about diet.
Okay, yeah. So there are definitely a couple of threads we could follow there. I was gonna ask, you know, what are some of the myths, you know, that you run into with your clients on a regular basis? I think we just stumbled onto a big one, which is kind of at the center of many, especially internet debates right now, which is fat, cholesterol, you know, whether it's from red meat or eggs. Those are two they're controversial for multiple reasons. Number one, you know, with red meat, because it's a source of saturated fat, and there's debate about saturated fat. Is it cancer causing? Is it not? We've talked in this podcast about, you know, the Journal for the American College of Cardiology report they put out in 2020, basically reversing their stance on saturated fat, and that many, other large medical organizations have done the same.
In some of these things, the pendulum is always swinging, right? Like Jesse's like half my age, so eggs didn't used to be vilified, right? They used to be health food, then they became the villain, right? Cholesterol is terrible for you. Everything became low fat, right? But I mean, I don't know about Australia, but I mean, when I was younger, like if you went into almost any restaurant in America, they would have, what they would call a quote unquote diet plate, right, on the menu. And that was always high protein and essentially no carbs. And that was normal. You would find it everywhere. It was like steak, cottage cheese, maybe like an avocado or a sliced up tomato. And that was like at every diner. I mean, every place had it, right? It was normal. And then all of a sudden, right, you went to the 80s, and that's when, everything became low fat, eggs were terrible, sugar was in everything. We all know what's been happening ever since. But yeah, it's interesting to me because of course, it's just, where's that pendulum when these judgments are made, right? And I also grew up in a different environment as far as what was healthy and so forth. So I already sort of, like you, at a very young age, was already recognizing the value of, more whole foods, good animal proteins, not a lot, no crap, no sugar, right? That was like built into me from growing up.
It does ebb and flow, as you say. Like, I'll just say that I read a medical textbook from like 1921, I believe. And back then, which actually wasn't that long ago, there were like hardly any cases of diabetes. Like, they didn't even know the difference between type 1 and type 2. They just called one of them easy to treat and one of them difficult to treat. The easy to treat one was what we now know as type 2 diabetes. And back then, they didn't have any anti-glycemic medications. They didn't have any pharmaceuticals they could throw at people to lower their glucose levels. And the way that they said it was easy to treat was to feed these people a diet of meat, eggs, fats, coffee, tea, alcohol, and no carbs, no starches, no sugars. And it was as clear as day back then that that was just such an easy way of treating it. Whereas somewhere along the line, again, we overcomplicate things, and, pharmaceuticals come into the mix and money comes into the mix. And we just kind of like lose this basic understanding of how the body works and what the body needs and what dietary information we should follow and use. So yeah, I totally agree with you. I think that we kind of used to know what to do and how to eat, and it's been complicated along the way. And I think what's really damaging is these messages that get given to the population as if everybody's the same, right? Cut out eggs, cut out meat, cut out salt. Yet what about the people who are iron deficient? And what about the people who have B12 deficiencies? What about the people who are sarcopenic and need protein? So none of these things get taken into account. There's a condition called POTS where people have really, really low blood pressure. And the treatment for that is a really high salt diet. What about them? They listen to this information, cut back on salt, and they take that on board as well because it's given to the population. So I think we need to basically not even have dietary guidelines, or make the dietary guidelines more basic so that we can give really fundamental principles that actually apply to everyone, rather than give this advice that may apply to a small percentage, but not to all of us.
So the answer to should I eat less salt is it depends.
Yeah.
And that's actually the answer for a lot of for most things, right? And honestly, that's a good answer to me, right? Like, I'd rather hear that than someone who just always knows the answer to everything. Like, I have one answer, it always works, right? It should be it depends quite often.
And I think too, like, the interesting thing we can talk about there is like, what is less salt? Like, did you ask that person how much salt they're eating now? They could already be restricting their salt. And if you go out and say, oh, you need to have less salt, you're just making the assumption that they are having too much salt, but you may not even know that. And as you quoted before, there is some research that shows that there is a kind of sweet spot for sodium intake. If you go over the sweet spot, your risk of disease and death doesn't actually increase that much. But if you go under the sweet spot, it rapidly shoots up. So it's far more dangerous to underconsume salt than to overconsume salt. So when you tell people to just cut back and eat less, you're potentially actually causing some serious harm.
Can we give like a layman's version of why that is? If you undereat salt, why you might be more predisposed to disease? I mean, is it as simple as not having enough sodium, not being able to retain water, and then sort of losing electrolytes through urine and that sort of thing?
The easiest way to think about it is that salt contains sodium. Sodium is an essential nutrient. If we didn't have any sodium, we would be dead. So that's the first thing I always say to my patients, because even though it's pretty harsh and it's pretty basic, it's true. Like if you don't have enough of these essential nutrients, you eventually will die. But your body isn't just going to randomly stop working one day. Along the way, there are going to be consequences to you not getting enough of this essential nutrient. And as you mentioned, blood pressure is extremely important. Most of the time, we're only ever thinking about high blood pressure. Oh my gosh, what do I do if my blood pressure is too high? But did you ever think about what might happen if you didn't have a blood pressure at all? Like you would be dead. You wouldn't be alive. You'd be a puddle on the floor, right? And so we need sodium to help keep water in the right places in our body. And that's what hydration is. Most of us think, okay, when I'm thirsty or when I'm dehydrated, I need water. But your blood is basically like the ocean. It's salt water. So if you're just drinking plain water to stay hydrated, your body's just going to push that right out to maintain the balance of sodium and water again. And all of our cells function based on that tight concentration of sodium and water in the body. And so usually the consequences of not having enough salt is your body desperately trying to push out water to maintain that balance again. So if you're pushing out water, you're going to have a low blood volume, so low blood pressure, dizziness, brain fog, lightheadedness. They're some of the symptoms people may experience. And if your cells don't have enough sodium to contract and relax, like your muscle cells, for example, they're not going to work properly. You can have fatigue, poor exercise recovery, muscle cramps, things like that. And what your body does when you don't consume enough sodium is it will pull sodium from the bones and put it in the blood. So people often get their blood levels of sodium checked and say, oh, mine are fine. Like I don't need to eat more salt. But what your body's doing is pulling those minerals from the bone, leaching other minerals, and then your bone mineral density declines. And so there's so many things in your body that are basically dependent on your sodium concentrations being in this really nice tight range in order to function properly. And I think in terms of why does it so significantly increase your risk of cardiovascular disease and death, I would say probably because of its role in your heart function. Like every time your heart beats, that's dependent on you having enough sodium in your blood. And so we can get caught up in thinking like, oh, high blood pressure, that's bad, therefore salt is bad, and just leave it there. But you need to look into the details, the nuances. An essential nutrient that you couldn't live without, like we would literally die without it. How can we just label that as bad and move on? There has to be a nuance.
Yeah, that's awesome. How important is it to your practice, the use of the blood work? You mentioned it multiple times. How often do you guys take blood work? And if it's not too much crazy detail, I'd love to know sort of, are there specific things that you're always looking for? Or again, does it depend on what the person's told you as they report, what you might be checking when you're doing basic blood stuff?
Yeah, so we like to do blood work for multiple different reasons. We like to use it as like an objective outcome. So sometimes, like especially if someone's got diabetes, for example, or they've got the metabolic syndrome, sometimes they get so used to feeling like crap that they actually don't think they feel like crap.
Sure.
They get so used to having high blood sugars, so used to having low energy. You ask them how they feel and they're like, oh yeah, I'm fine, I'm okay. Just because they felt like that for so long.
Totally.
Yeah. And for those people, they basically need those objective outcomes. Like we need to test the glucose in their blood. We need to test the insulin levels. We need to test the cholesterol so that they can actually see that all their efforts with their dietary changes and their lifestyle changes are actually making a difference, because sometimes they don't feel it or notice it on a day-to-day basis. So that's one reason as a motivating factor for our clients. Another reason is there are some things you can't see or tell from a dietary assessment. So for example, B12 deficiency, that's a really good one. Iron deficiency. Some of those symptoms of B12 deficiency, iron deficiency, people aren't always aware of them, number one, and you can't always pick them up. Like someone might be eating red meat twice a day, yet they can still be iron deficient. If you didn't do the blood test, you would just assume, this person's eating plenty of red meat, they're getting in their iron, all is good. But we don't know exactly how that person's absorbing iron. We don't know how much iron they actually need every single day. We can use science to help guide us. But unless we actually do the blood test, we don't really know how much of a certain nutrient someone needs. So it kind of clarifies our assessment in a lot of ways so we can really understand what their nutritional priorities are. And then also too, we do it, I guess, to justify our dietary approach. Because as we've already been discussing, a lot of the things that we do are different to like the standard advice. You know, asking people to increase their intake of red meat is a little controversial. Asking people to have more salt, asking people to have more fat, those things are quite controversial, and a lot of GPs and medical professionals and cardiologists don't like when we do things like this. So by having the blood test to actually show we are improving this person's health and we are not causing any negative impacts on their kidney function, their cholesterol, their risk of heart disease, we can actually show all these other healthcare professionals and the patient that we are holistically improving that person's health and there's no negative side effects to what we're doing.
That seems pretty rational, that you did, right? You know, ask somebody to implement some changes, test to see how those changes are doing. If they're working, keep doing them. If they're not,
tweak it,
change back or change. Yeah. We've mentioned this anecdote in our podcast before. We had a client who was he was in his 70s. He does not, train with us anymore, but he had a weight loss goal, a significant weight loss goal. And, so we were coaching him with his strength training, and we also were giving him some guidance with the nutrition. And our guidance was that he should focus on eating lean protein, and not be afraid of fat necessarily if it's coming from good sources, and eat, vegetables and whole food, all the things that, Liam mentioned earlier. And he was going to, he's like on very close terms with his cardiologist, like, because he's got heart issues and blood pressure stuff going on. And so he went to his doctor, and he said, I've been doing these things, and he put them into play for like a month or two. And then he went back to the doctor. He got his blood test done. And there were a couple of markers that showed improvement. And his doctor was like, it basically said, I see that these things have improved, but I still want you to stay on the plant-based diet. That JACC review that I mentioned a little earlier, we sent that to our client. He brought it to his cardiologist. The cardiologist said, "Oh, I actually know some of the doctors who put out this review, and I respect them, but I still want you to stay on the plant-based diet." And it was very frustrating for us. Like we gave him the advice worked, and they just reversed it arbitrarily against the, positive health outcomes that were measurable.
Yeah. We actually have had some good success with other clients as well with nutritional interventions. I had another guy who was type 2, like right on the fence there, metabolic stuff, that went to the doctor. They immediately threw him on the meds or recommended them. They said, like so many doctors do, I find a lot of doctors, basically when someone manifests these things, which you and I know can literally be reversed within a month if you just change a few things, they'll literally tell these patients, "Oh, you have it now. This is going to be a lifetime thing. Now you just have to make these changes. You're going to be taking these medications. Maybe it'll be insulin eventually, right?" And of course, we know type 2 and type 1 have nothing to do with each other except for the name diabetes, right? And the mechanisms. So I told the guy what to do. He took my advice. He went back to the doctor a couple of months later. They're like, "Wow, everything's better. See, everything that we told you is working." He's like, "No, I didn't take your advice. I took another guy's advice. I'm not on any of the meds. And I'm not going to use you as my doctor anymore because you told me all this terrible stuff." And he was completely successful. And so, he's like, they're like, "What?" He's like, "Yeah, I listened to another guy who said change what I was eating instead of take a bunch of pills."
I love that.
Yeah, and we have a lot of success stories like that. So it's nice when they happen, but we do have some failures as well, like this other guy who he just wouldn't hear it no matter what we said. And like you said, it's a cultural thing, right? And why does that voice, like you're saying, for instance, you keep talking about the low sodium, how come that one wins out? Like when you have this rational, clear, supported evidence, is it just because they've been hearing it longer? You know what I mean?
Yeah, they just hear it from more sources and they've been hearing it for longer than anything else.
It's still the majority way of thinking. Like, as I said, when I went through my dietetics training, like all of this stuff that we're talking about now wasn't even brought up. And I remember I would ask questions like at university where you're supposed to ask questions and be inquisitive and be critical. I would ask questions about, well, why are we telling our patients to reduce saturated fat? Why are we telling them to eat so many carbs when their problem is high blood sugars? I would ask these questions and I would just be shut down. Like it wouldn't be encouraged. It wouldn't be a positive discussion, It was just, I guess people have their own biases. And I guess if you're a healthcare professional and you've been taught one way and maybe you haven't necessarily questioned that and you've given advice to patients for 10, 20 years, you don't want to accept that maybe your advice that you've given was wrong. And so I think a lot of healthcare professionals can't get past that, unfortunately, and that's no excuse. They should be getting past that and they should be doing what's best for their patient. But we have so many stories, the same as you both, where we will work with a patient. They'll be super motivated, super on track, doing so well, literally reversing diabetes, improving their nutrient status, also improving their disordered eating, which is something we see a lot in our patients. And they will go to their GP or their cardiologist and they'll be completely derailed. They'll be told everything they're doing is wrong. They'll be told that they're going to cause a heart attack. They'll really have the fear driven into them.
Yeah, they'll just be afraid to eat anything.
Yes.
Yeah,
yes.
That's horrible.
It's horrible. And especially when these cardiologists don't actually know that their patients have a binge eating disorder. They don't actually know that their patient was severely iron deficient. They don't know all of these things. All they're looking at is their LDL cholesterol.
Right.
And they go, oh, well, it's too high. Everything you're doing is going to kill you. Stop it now. And unfortunately, because they have that high status, people really do value what they say. And even if they've learned this whole other way and they've seen how good it works for them, some people don't have the confidence to actually kind of speak up and stand up for themselves, unfortunately.
Yeah, I've actually had an unfortunate situation with one particular client where they had someone else, another professional, basically giving him completely opposite advice of what I said. And they told me straight up, if it comes down between you and her, I'm going to listen to her, not you, right? And I said, I would love to have a conversation with this person and, just like a straight up, honest, like chat about what they think and, and share some information. And the other person refused to talk to me. They're like, no, I don't want to talk to that guy, right? He doesn't know anything. Listen to me, tell him to shut up. And, they're like, okay, I'm taking their advice, not yours. So yeah, it's true. The status thing, and it's unfortunate. We do see guys in our circle. I'm sure you, like Dr. Ken Berry and Andrew Swari, these are probably guys or have heard of at least on Instagram or whatever, who have changed their ways and recognized they were wrong, right? And should be applauded. Like Ken Berry completely has changed from what his original practice and everything that he's done. He's like a totally different guy with a totally different approach. And that's awesome.
Jessica, you work at the Center for Gastrointestinal Health with Dr. Pran Yoganathan, he's getting his voice out there on social media these days. He's inserting himself right into the center of some of these hot debates, which is really interesting. And I wonder, it seems like, I would assume, I definitely, we need to hear from you, but is everybody, on the same team at that center? Is everybody sort of doing the low carb, advice for your patients and sort of leaning that way? Is that what you would call it? Or you just call it nutrition advice or like just sound medical advice?
So it's interesting. Dr. Pran Yoganathan, he basically was like just in his standard profession for many years, where he was just doing scopes, finding out what was wrong with people, sending them off to get medications and, that was, or have surgeries or whatever it may be. And that was his job. And he would always say that, he didn't feel so satisfied from what he was doing. He was just going through the motions. And then he basically realized for himself and for his family how important nutrition was. And he started seeing it through a new lens. And we connected kind of earlier on in his, passion and quest for diving deeper into nutrition. And it's just so interesting because a dietitian and a gastroenterologist, you think that would be a match made in heaven, but there's not many clinics around that do both. Most clinics are just gastroenterology. You've got your gastrointestinal specialists, you've got nurses, you've got surgeons, but you don't actually have the lifestyle side of it there with dietitians or exercise physiologists, trying to, help people improve their gut health and prevent the need for surgery and prevent the need for medications. And so, he is definitely one of those health professionals I admire because he completely admits that, there were things going on in his medical profession that are just plain wrong and things that don't stand the test of time. And he's definitely a man that practices what he preaches. And we still work within that sphere with GPs and things like that. And we educate them on what we are doing and how we're doing things differently. And a lot of GPs don't like what we're doing. A lot of them do like what we're doing. So there's a bit of a mixed bag. But since, teaming up, the practice has grown and people are loving what we are doing. And we're not necessarily a low carb practice or anything like that. It's definitely more so personalized nutrition. And what Dr. Pran, Yoganathan, and I have found is that with these gut issues, like these chronic gut issues, whether it's IBS, IBD, doesn't matter what you call it, people have these terrible gut symptoms that are often debilitating, whether it's like chronic diarrhea or constipation or severe abdominal pain or reflux. And they just sound like everyday symptoms, but these can actually be debilitating and stop people from leaving the house and stop people from having social relationships and stop people from working. Like these are debilitating gut issues. And really the standard approach is throwing medications at it or taking out a part of your bowel. And so what we found is that if we actually look at these people's metabolic health, we find more often than not that there's things there like high insulin levels, high blood pressure, diabetes, blood sugar problems, obesity, visceral adipose tissue. Like there's so many things there that we can improve for that patient. Maybe we don't know what's causing their gut problems, or maybe we don't know how to fix that, but there's a lot we do know how to fix. So we address those metabolic issues first. And what we find is that the gut issues in many cases will just go away. And so there's no other practice that I'm aware of actually doing it like that. Most of the time, if you do see a gastroenterologist who's referred you to a dietitian, they'll just put you on some kind of elimination diet. Like, let's find the food trigger that's causing your issues. But it's not usually necessarily a food trigger per se. It's something wrong with that person's physiology. And a lot of the time, it's their metabolic health. Sometimes it's their nutritional status. Sometimes it's something else in the body causing inflammation, like arthritis. And all of those things we actually know how to address. So we apply what we know to the patient, and the improvements in their gut health is like a side effect of all of that.
And do you prescribe or recommend exercise stuff as part of your work with these people, or do you have any connections, where you can help them improve that part to help? Because that's obviously going to benefit metabolic health as well as, the nutritional combination. It's like the 1-2 punch that you're after, right?
Yeah, we have a big focus on encouraging our clients to build muscle mass.
Awesome.
And we don't actually give the exercise advice, but we usually help our patients team up with someone like an exercise physiologist or a personal trainer who can do that with them. And I think particularly for people who have had quite a chronic history of dieting, where they've been on very restrictive diets in the past, they find it very difficult to lose weight. And it's usually because their metabolic rate is just so low. They might be obese, but they might be completely under-muscled. And so we really work at trying to improve their metabolic rate. And there's a lot more benefits to that than just losing fat. Because if your metabolic rate is low, it means you don't have enough energy for the brain. You don't have enough energy for the gut. You don't have enough energy for your hormones and your enzymes to work properly. You don't have enough energy to function at work. And people don't think of these things.
People try to put a Band-Aid on it and just drink more coffee and,
Yeah. And people don't think about the consequences of their dieting history. And everybody wants that quick fix. And we'll have patients that come in and just say, look, all I want to do is just an 800 calorie diet and lose weight really quickly. I want to do meal replacement shakes. I just want to lose 10 kilos in a week. And then our job is to sort of educate them on what the consequences of that are. Whereas whether it's muscle mass wasting, metabolic rate declining, what that's going to look like in your everyday life. And so what we encourage people to do is build their metabolic rate up. So one of the ways to do that, as you both know, is building muscle mass.
Absolutely.
Very cool. I saw you today or yesterday repost something from Dr. Gabrielle Lyon, and I was super excited to see that because she's somebody who I've been following. I only recently became aware of her, but she has a growing online presence. I definitely highly recommend to our listeners to go check her out because she talks about muscle-centric medicine, which is really cool. So it's really encouraging to hear, Jessica, that you guys are really pushing strength training with your clients.
Yeah, I think the reason most diets fail is because people are not consuming enough protein. And, when I started off as a dietitian, I thought the worst thing you could possibly eat was carbohydrates. That was going to spike your blood sugar levels. Everybody needed to eat more fat. And that works for a lot of people, cutting down on carbs, increasing fat, especially if they've got metabolic issues like type 2 diabetes. But it's only more recently in my more recent research that I'm actually really seeing, you know what? If we all just did one thing and that one thing was eat more protein, so many health issues would improve. So many things would get better. And yes, carbs and fat are important. And yes, we need to individualize those things for certain people. But now we always teach our patients to prioritize protein. And part of our reasoning for that, I know a lot of people talk about protein and muscle and bone health and things like that. One of the things that people don't talk about that often when it comes to protein is that protein foods, particularly animal-based proteins like meat, fish, eggs, dairy, they are some of the highest nutrient-dense foods. So the highest sources of micronutrients like vitamins, minerals, fatty acids. And working in clinic with hundreds or thousands of people that we've worked with over the years, nutrient deficiencies are very, very common and they have severe consequences. And I don't think enough people talk about this. But say, for example, you have an untreated B12 deficiency and that stays with you throughout life. You can end up with Alzheimer's and dementia. Like, it can really impact your life. You can get nerve damage in your hands and your feet and feel constant pain, constant burning from a nutrient deficiency. People don't talk about this stuff. And so when you go and look for the food sources of these nutrients, they're always in animal protein foods. They have far more nutrients than any other food. Fruits and vegetables do not compare to animal-based proteins when it comes to micronutrient density. So that's one of the big reasons we push that, because we're trying to correct people's nutrient deficiencies and also prevent nutrient deficiencies. And that's an easy strategy, is make sure every single meal you're prioritizing protein.
Yeah, I think those sort of like finer details come across really well in your social media posts, because if you're just on its face comparing, like a plant-based source of protein to an animal-based source of protein, right? You can eat enough of the plant-based protein to get the same amount of protein that the steak or whatever it is will give you, but you're still missing the point or you could be missing the point that there are micronutrients that come along with those sources of nutrients as well.
Yeah.
So it depends.
Yeah, definitely.
Hey, what are those guys doing here? Whenever I feel like I'm stalling out on my bench press, I know I need a new strength curve.
Whether you're stalling out on the road or stalling out in the gym, you need something with great engineering.
That's right. And
So look for the pendulum. Pendulum.
Not just your average strength machines.
No, they have smooth strength curves.
Amazing rigidity.
And did we mention the engineering's fantastic?
That's right. Not to mention, They come in cool colors.
Like red.
And silver. Well, that was kind of weird. What was that all about? Back to the interview.
So, Jessica, you mentioned disordered eating, which is, I learned a couple of years ago as I was going through the precision nutrition certification that disordered eating is very common, which I had not realized. Only in retrospect, kind of reflecting on all of the clients that I've worked with over my 5 years, being a strength coach, could I sort of identify some of those people who might have been dealing with those situations. But you have a personal story. I wonder if you'd be willing to share with our listeners about dealing with an eating disorder firsthand.
Yeah, definitely. That's fine. And people don't think disordered eating is common. And I think that's because they don't necessarily know the difference between eating disorder and disordered eating. So an eating disorder is like a clinical diagnosis, like bulimia nervosa, anorexia nervosa, binge eating disorder.
Sure.
Whereas disordered eating is those behaviors and feelings and actions even that, I guess, constitute an eating disorder, but not necessarily with that defined diagnosis. And they're things as common as like feeling guilty after you eat, or thinking about food all throughout the day, or like hoarding food or playing with food, or feeling anxious around certain foods, or not wanting to eat with other people, or even like restrictive dieting behaviors, like, obsessively tracking everything you're eating. Like just because you do some of those things doesn't mean you have an eating disorder, but it may mean that you're dealing with disordered eating. So my story goes way back to when I was in high school. And ever since I can remember, like even in primary school, I remember being really interested in nutrition and diet and what I was eating and what other people were eating. And when I went into high school, I'm really, really tall. Well, I was really tall. So I basically hit my peak height when I was in year 6. So it was 175 centimeters, and I just towered over everybody else.
What is that in feet? We got to do a quick conversion for our Americans. Here, I'm gonna look it up.
Yeah, you look it up. But I basically hit my peak height.
5'9". 5'9".
Oh, okay, so yeah, that's pretty tall.
Yeah, and that was when I was in year 6, right? So I was pretty young. No one else had like hit their growth spurt yet. And so when I went into high school, I was just physically so much bigger than everybody else. And so it led me to, I guess, have those doubts about my body and feel a little bit uncomfortable in my own skin. And, it's that time where you're always comparing yourself with other people. And comments people would make about how big I was, mainly because I was taller than other people. I wasn't overweight at that time, but they just play on your mind. And so when I was, I think in year 8 or 9, I was about 14. I decided to jump on Google and just look up, how do I lose weight? What's the best way to lose weight? And the intentions were really innocent. I just wanted to be a little bit healthier, just be a little bit slimmer. And I also wanted to just make sure I was eating right. Like I was really interested in diet and nutrition at a young age, and I didn't really know how to formulate my meals and things like that. So I had very positive intentions going into it. And as you probably assume, if you Google how to lose weight, the first thing that comes up is calorie restriction. So eat less calories than you burn each day and the weight will just drop off you. So I started counting calories, weighing foods, getting really interested in the calorie content of foods. I started exercising more to increase my calorie output. And I basically started losing weight. And everybody around me was commenting like, wow, you look amazing. What are you doing? This is fantastic. Can you help me? Everybody was sort of reacting very positively to what I was doing. But somewhere along the line, what was a positive thing turned into quite a negative thing. And instead of me kind of having control over what I was doing, what I was eating, something else had control over me. And the calorie counting, the calorie restriction, the exercise, it just kept ramping up. And, you set, and this happens in everyday world, right? Like you set weight loss goals, you reach that weight loss goal and you're like, what next? I'm just going to go lower. I'm just going to go lower. And And as a young person, you're actually not really taught about what makes up your body. You're not taught about, oh, your body is made up of bones and muscles and connective tissue and skin. So when you jump on the scale, you literally think that number is just pure fat.
Yeah.
You're just like, how can I get this down more and more and more?
Yeah,
And
yeah.
it becomes like this forever goal that you're forever chasing. So basically, what happened was the calorie restriction itself led to the disordered eating behaviors. So as I said, these behaviors started taking over me. I wasn't necessarily in control of them. And I started, skipping social events, skipping meals, telling people I had eaten when I hadn't. I lost about 40 kilograms.
Wow.
That is a lot.
Especially for a young woman. Yeah, that's crazy.
Yeah, it was. And I was a completely different person. So I wasn't the same person as I was losing weight. As I said, these eating disorder behaviors actually they took over my identity. They took over who I was.
That's 40 kilograms for you Americans listening is 88 pounds.
Yeah. That's crazy because I can only imagine you're just being like a skeleton at that point.
Yeah. Well, I was carrying a little bit of extra weight to start and I was tall. So it was kind of all spread out. And yeah, at first people were congratulating me. Wow, you look amazing. But then as it continued to progress, people became very concerned.
They're like, hey, now you're scary.
Exactly. But the interesting thing is I didn't change what I was doing. The whole time I was just cutting back on calories and exercising more. And I just continued to do that. And it's an interesting place to be when people are congratulating you for that. And then all of a sudden they're turning on you for that. And people were concerned, so they didn't know how to act around me. So they kind of got angry at me and didn't want to be around me. And it's a very isolating place to be. And I was lucky enough to kind of hit that light bulb moment where I stepped on the scales. I realized how much weight I lost. And I was like, gosh, I cannot keep doing this anymore. But then the next stage of the disordered eating kind of occurred where I was like, all right, I'm just going to eat normally. And for someone who's just been so focused on calories, that's all I saw in food was just calories. I didn't see the nutrient value. I didn't see the protein value. It was just everything is calories to me. And so when I tried to quote unquote eat normally, I couldn't. I didn't know how to. And so what happens to people who, I know this now because of the research I've done, but I didn't know it at the time. What happens to people who have been in this sort of phase of starvation where they haven't had enough calories to fuel their brain and their body, they are actually at an increased risk of binge eating because it's a physiological response that happens when all of a sudden the food is around again. Your body's trying to take in all the energy it can in expectation of that next period of starvation. And so I basically lost control around food. I developed a severe binge eating disorder. I rapidly gained all of that weight back plus more. And it was interesting because everybody was like, oh, well, she's healthy again now. But I was actually overweight at this point, completely under-muscled because I was just gaining fat so rapidly. And I was probably in a much worse mental state than I'd ever been because my biggest fear, which was gaining weight, was happening and I had no control over what was going in my body. And
That's terrifying.
It's terrifying. Like a lot of people who haven't actually had binge eating before don't really know, they just think, oh, they're just overeating, but it's not like that. You completely lose control of your body and things are going into your body that you don't want to go into there. And there's nothing you can do about it until you get so physically full that you vomit or you pass out or something like that stops you. You can't stop. And it's such a horrible place to be. And so is, rapid weight loss as well. I mean, there's negatives to both of those things. I'm not saying one is better than the other. But I actually went into my uni degree having this binge eating disorder and being overweight. So this whole time I wanted to be a dietitian. I knew I wanted to be a dietitian, but my reason for wanting to be a dietitian changed and it became very selfish. I was like, what the heck do I eat? How do I eat for myself? How do I reach that healthy weight? How do I stop binge eating? Like all I cared about was me at that point because I was in such a shamble with what I was doing. I thought I was doing what was healthy, which was calorie restriction. And that led me into this disordered eating state. And then everyone was telling me I was healthy because I'd gained all this weight. But behind closed doors, I had this uncontrolled binge eating disorder. So it was pretty ironic, going to uni to become a dietitian when I literally had no idea how to eat for myself.
Yeah, I'm curious. I mean, that's crazy. But I'm curious because when you went to, for your further degrees, and as you were saying, you had come to these conclusions about fats and proteins and so forth, and you were actually getting pushback about it. They weren't supporting, you're asking these questions and they don't want to hear it. They don't want to talk. But how did you come to those things earlier in your career about fat and protein, your own theories and ideas or opinions before you even got to the higher degree? What led you to these discoveries, which we totally agree with, but what got you to that point so early in your career after having these other challenges?
Yeah, so when I had when I was going through all of that disordered eating, I was basically still under the impression that fats were bad because they were calorie dense and I needed to somehow control my calories. And the easiest way to do that was cutting back on fats, right? And then when I was at uni, my first degree was exercise sports science, which wasn't actually a nutrition degree. It was a science-based undergrad. And in that degree, I learned a lot about the human body, and in particular, how your body uses different types of fuels. And the context of what we were learning was about exercise. But the minute I heard fat burning, I was like, oh, that sounds interesting. How can I apply that to myself in terms of weight loss and weight management? And I was lucky enough to have an exercise biochemistry lecture with Kieran Rooney, who's now my supervisor. And he basically taught us about the role of insulin in fuel utilization and spoke to us about how your body can use glucose for energy and how it can use fat for energy. And all of that stuff seems kind of obvious to us now, but back then I had never heard anyone talk about that. It was all just about if you restrict your calories, you'll lose weight. No one ever sort of spoke about how your body uses different fuels and how your body uses energy and how that's to do with these different macronutrients and not necessarily to do with calories. So it was kind of at that point there where I dove into the research after learning more about how the body works and the hormonal functions in the body and the role of insulin. And I just dove down a rabbit hole of low carbohydrate diet research, where I figured out that obviously if we wanted to lower insulin, we wanted to teach our body to burn fat, then we'd have to lower carbohydrates and we'd have to eat more fats. And I applied that to myself, and the results were amazing, not necessarily just from a weight management perspective, but from a mental health perspective. So I was someone that kind of knew so much about nutrition compared to the average person. Yet I didn't know how to kind of eat for myself. I couldn't get over this binge eating disorder. I was carrying extra weight. And when I started this lower carbohydrate approach, it was for aesthetic reasons. I just wanted to reach my healthy weight. I thought I was never going to get over the binge eating. But what I noticed was the more I kind of filled up on higher fat foods, the less desire or that less urge I had to binge. So the frequency would just come down and down and down. And also too, ironically, the less carbohydrates I would eat, the less desire I had to binge as well. And I say that's ironic because usually when you have an eating disorder, people say, don't restrict anything, eat everything in moderation. But that's what I was trying to do. And physiologically, I just could not do that. So
Yeah. Sorry. Yeah. Not to interrupt, but I heard you in the Vibe with Tribe podcast preparing for this interview. And I heard you say something similar. And I thought, yes, that is me as well. I cannot control myself around sugary foods. If I want ice cream, I need to go out and get an ice cream cone and eat only that ice cream cone. And even then I'm still at risk of stopping by the grocery store on the way home and picking up a pint, which I will eat all of in one sitting. So I just can't bring that stuff into the store for salty foods, and for anything else. Just about moderation works, but not for sugary stuff.
And yeah, I mean, that's kind of like if food is controlling you and you're not in control of food, you can't have food freedom. And I think a lot of the times people talk about food freedom as if it's just like being able to eat everything you want and then being able to somehow stop yourself. But the thing is, a lot of these food products are designed to be addictive.
Absolutely.
So when you're trying to achieve food freedom with ice cream, I'm sorry, but people cannot do that.
Well, yeah. Well, some people can't do that, right? Some people can.
Yeah.
My girlfriend does it, but yeah, it seems like the people that are actually able to achieve that are in the minority.
Yeah. I mean, they're all those things are, like you said, they're laboratory designed to be hyper palatable, right? Like there's a type of potato chip over here in America, right? Which this what you guys may have over there, Lay's, right? Which, the slogan is "Bet you can't eat just one," right? That's been the slogan forever, right? Because it's true, you can't eat just one. You put it in your mouth, and next thing you know, salt and fat and all those things. Fireworks are going off in your brain. Yeah, people can't stop, right? They're just like salty things at the pub, right? I mean, there's reasons why all these things are there, and there's reasons why there's scientists developing flavors for Taco Bell. You know what I mean?
And these are the foods that, like, when we're talking about the everyday person who doesn't necessarily have an eating disorder, these are the everyday experiences people are having, and they blame themselves. They're like, why can't I just stop at one square of chocolate? Why do I have to eat the whole block? And, they're always thinking about what sort of ice cream is in the fridge or what donut they've got for later. These thoughts that just consume your brain. That is disordered eating. And that does make it difficult for people to actually eat in a way that is going to, I guess, make their body feel their best. So I think it's really important to acknowledge, and this is what I found for me when I was going through this phase of my life. I found that, I had to be very black and white because I had to basically fix my physiology. It was broken. This calorie restriction, this period of starvation had changed the way that my body functions. And so I couldn't eat normally. I had to eat therapeutically. And that's how I see low carbohydrate diets. I see them as a therapeutic diet in many ways, especially very low carb ketogenic diets, where we're trying to fix something that's broken. And for me, like, my satiety signals were completely messed up. I just didn't feel satiated. So I needed thousands of calories of fats in order to achieve that. And that's not necessarily something you'd recommend to the everyday person, but because I was going through a specific phase of healing, I needed to do that. And so I think the benefits of, the lower carb, the higher fat, the nutrient dense foods like meat and eggs and things like that, the benefits for me were really mental benefits in being able to, I guess, move past that disordered eating and actually be able to, I guess, find more of that food freedom, because now I don't have to be on a very low carb diet to achieve what I call food freedom. I'm not stuck on that diet. I used it to get out of the phase I was in, fix the way my body works, help to increase my metabolic rate. That's really, really important, because if your body feels that it's deprived of energy, that does increase your risk of disordered eating. So you need to liberate energy and teach your body to burn energy better, so it's not stuck in that period of, or that phase of starvation. And then you do have more flexibility, and you can be that person that says, I'll have a little bit of ice cream and I can stop after that. But it takes a long time to get there, and you have to fix your metabolic health and your physiological health to get there. And there's certain strategies that I would implement now, like making sure that my meals are very high in protein, very high in healthy fats, so that I have more, I guess, freedom to do other things. Like if I want to have a cookie or a biscuit or something, it doesn't send me over the edge.
I can just picture you on campus, getting the degree. She's in between lectures at the campus gym. She's doing a set of deadlifts. She's munching on a steak in between sets.
100%. I mean, it's so funny because I don't do this that frequently. I probably should do it more, but my consults are mainly just about telling people to eat more food. Like, people are under consuming food. They're restricting, they're having little portions frequently throughout the day. And then they're coming home after work at night, binge eating because they're just so ravenously hungry, and they blame themselves for it.
Right. They over consuming energy, under consuming nutrients. And it's a really tricky thing to communicate with people, especially coming full circle to the beginning of our conversation about these online debates. One of the kind of central nutrition themes that we hone in on with our podcast guests is, the Seco, which Dr. Ken Berry calls them the like Kiko nuts, which I just think is funny. I don't necessarily agree with that wholeheartedly, but versus the people who come from more of like the the hormones drive everything into the spectrum, like Dr. Jason Fung. And when we are coaching our clients and when we're talking about nutrition in this podcast, and when we really try to strike a balance.
Yeah, I like the unified theory of nutrition, right? Like both of those things are valid, right? Hormones absolutely play a part, and total calories absolutely play a part, right? They're not two. It's not either or, but there is a difference, between, you can't just eat less of a certain thing and that's like a healthy diet. Like I can take exactly what I eat that's perfect now, and if I just eat less of it, I'll lose weight, aka what kind of weight, right? So I want to hold muscle, we want to lose fat, right? There's a lot going on with these things, and yeah, so I think hopefully our approach is a little more balanced. Yeah, we know both of these things are true. Hormones are important, calories are important, glutes are good. We know all those things.
I totally agree. But you know what is really interesting is like whenever people talk about like low calorie diets and calorie restriction, I think it's really important to actually like put number values onto that, because we have research that shows that reducing your calories 50%, so 50% less than what your body actually needs to function, is actually what they call semi-starvation, and that can lead to disordered eating. And so when we're talking about our relationship with food and making sure our brain, our body has enough energy, we have to make sure that people aren't over restricting calories, because we need to first find out, well, how much calories do you as an individual need? Because most of the time what people do is they just say, oh, I'm going to lose weight. I'm going to find this 1,200 calorie diet plan, and that's going to put me in a calorie deficit. But how much calories does your body need? No one talks about that. People just, go onto these low calorie meal plans, because if you restrict your calories too much, there are very severe consequences to that. And it's not just muscle loss, it is also mental health problems and eating disorders as well. So we do have to be very careful. And so I definitely agree with the calories in, calories out to an extent. But what I help my clients do is increase their calories out. Increase your calories out and create a calorie deficit that way. Don't restrict your calories in. And it works wonders.
We have a really great, we had an amazing story. If you ever get a chance, episode number 37, way back in 2019, we had a guest who had some crazy stuff about disordered eating. It was fascinating.
Jamie Edgel, if you're listening and you want to go back and check it out.
It's an amazing story. And, she completely transformed her life. She's now a personal trainer, and she manages a gym, and she's in terrific shape. And she went through this amazing stuff where she was actually basically taking drugs to make herself sleep during the day so she wouldn't eat. Like her way of not eating was to restrict calorie, was just sleep through everything. So she wasn't aware of that hunger, right? And she would, so basically taking things to make her sleep and then restricting by creating a very small window, right? And like calories restricted. It was a crazy stuff that she was engaging in. And obviously she's got a total handle on everything now, and she's in amazing shape. But it's an incredible story for people who are struggling with these things, or having these challenges, right? It's worth listening to.
Absolutely. And I feel like the innocent desire to be healthy and lose a little bit of weight, where you start cutting back calories, it all starts quite positive and level-headed. But I think it's important to acknowledge that the calorie restriction itself, if it's too severe, that will, I guess, ignite the disordered eating. And a lot of people will say, with these people that have disordered eating, why can't they just eat more? Like, what's their problem? Why can't they just do it? Like, why are they doing this to themselves? Like, that's what people said to me all the time. Why are you doing this to yourself? But it wasn't me. Those behaviors were not conscious at that point. The severe deprivation of energy was causing my brain to do things that I was not in control of. And so that's what people need to understand when it comes to calorie restriction. there are consequences to going too low. So it's actually something we need to talk more about. And we need to probably get better testing so we can test people's basal metabolic rate a little bit more accurately and have people that are appropriately applying, activity factors and stress factors to really understand what's the calories that person needs every day. And if you're going to do calorie restriction, make sure it's just a moderate calorie restriction based on that person's individual needs.
Do you have numbers for that sort of? I understand that you're making it clear that it's individual, but like you'd say, maybe 10%, 20%, 15%, not like 40 or 50. Obviously, you're saying that's extreme when people are creating these deficits. Because it's funny, we just did an episode recently talking about sort of getting in shape for summer, and we talked about nutrition quite a bit because we feel like nutrition's a big part of it for a lot of people. It's not just what you do in the gym, but it sounds to me like you're encouraging people to try to create that deficit. Is it through more movement and exercise stuff, like the calories outside of the equation rather than restricting the calorie inside? Or do you try to find that balance? Like if you wanted to create a 500 calorie deficit, would you be saying, let's find a way to burn 250 more and eat 250 less rather than just chop 500 out of my eating?
Well, sometimes you need to kind of like separate you have to do it in stages essentially. So sometimes people are coming in like I was, when I was at uni, my metabolic health was just broken. Like the amount of calories my body was burning every day was so low because I had that period of starvation. And interestingly, a lot of people have times in their life, whether it was recent or decades ago, where they've been on a very low calorie, very restrictive diet, whether it was because they were trying to lose weight or because they were sick or because something else was going on, they were stressed. And that's why we ask about people's dieting history, because if they've been through that period of really low calorie intake, it does mean that their calorie output is also very low, and it can be very low for decades. So sometimes what we need to do is actually focus first on increasing that up back to where it should be. So say, for example, someone had a history of severe dieting, their body might only be burning like 1,000 calories each day. So every time they eat a little bit over 1,000 calories, they essentially can gain weight or find it very difficult to lose weight. And so a few principles that we can apply is really ramping up the protein, because that will increase your metabolic rate. Going on a low carb, very high fat diet, because that's been shown to increase your metabolic rate without calorie restriction. And then, as you both alluded to, exercise, but making sure it's muscle building exercise, resistance training, as opposed to calorie burning exercise, like, going on a long run or something like that. We want to keep the exercise short, sharp, and sweet.
Nice.
And focusing on resistance training. Yeah.
That's what we're all about.
I like it. Short, sharp, sweet.
Yes.
3 S's.
Short, yeah, definitely.
We're gonna make some T-shirts.
I like it. Well, sign me up.
And we'll have your name on it. Boom, baby. Short, sharp, sweet.
And we'll mail you one. It's going to be stuck on a ship for about 7 months, so be patient.
Yeah.
Yeah, I'm already aware of that. I ordered a lounge at the beginning of COVID, and it took like 2 years to come to me. It was coming from the US, so I understand that.
Okay, so in 2025, when the shirt shows up, make sure you take a picture and send it to us.
Exactly. But I guess just to wrap up that like calories in, calories out conversation, the first step is to increase someone's calorie output. And then the second step is to look at calorie restriction.
It sounds like you're doing it then more through just dietary changes, but so that would boost their, like you said, more protein, higher fat, lower carb, and then strength training of some kind. Would all those things could be like a triple threat that could be beneficial for the outside. Yeah. Awesome.
Yeah, definitely. And like when we're talking about like calorie restriction as well, and how much do you restrict calories, sometimes it's not even a conscious thing that you're having to tell the patient. Sometimes because you've taught them to build their diet in such a way that's satiating, and they don't think about food between meals, they're not snacking as much, they're not binge eating anymore. Naturally, that leads to a lower intake of calories, and they might create a calorie deficit without even having to think about it. And when you look at the studies in type 2 diabetes and low carb diets, most of them do that. Most of them don't set a calorie target, and they just let people eat to satiety, and they naturally create a calorie deficit.
Nice.
Beautiful.
I love it.
Yeah, your body wants to find that homeostasis, wants to be comfortable.
Just get out of the way and let it take care of itself.
When you were talking earlier, Jessica, you reminded me of, I don't know if this researcher's name rings a bell. Amber O'Hearn. Do you follow her?
Yeah.
Oh man, she is really cool. She's, for our listeners, if you haven't looked her up, check her out. She's big on Twitter. She's been doing a carnivore diet for a long time, and she likes to talk about how basically a meat-based diet helped her put her bipolar disorder in remission, which is incredible. And that's something that like the low carb like internet community, it talks about a lot, is about the mental health benefits of carbohydrate restriction. And so that's something I really look forward to seeing more research come out in that area, because it is just really cool stuff. A lot of the time over the last 5 years, I've met with new clients, and they want to start a training program for this reason or that reason, and I find myself thinking, it probably would be better if you like talked with a therapist or you talked with a dietitian, right? Like I'm probably not the first point of contact. If you really want to do what's best for your health in a holistic sense, one of those other routes might be best. But I suppose if they're starting an exercise program, that is a decent place to start as well. So we just support people however we can.
That's right, especially when it's a safe, efficient strength training program.
Short, sharp and sweet, right?
Exactly.
There's one other guy I'm curious if you're familiar with. He's down your way, Dr. Stephen Lin, the dentist.
Yeah, I actually met him recently. He lives
Cool.
quite close to me, actually. So he was holding a presentation at his practice.
All right.
We went along, and it was amazing to see a dentist talking about diet and nutrition and sunlight and sleep. And so, yeah, I totally respect everything that he has to say.
Yeah, you had also reminded me of him earlier, because as we were talking about sodium, and how that can potentially, if you don't have enough sodium, it can pull nutrients from other places. And Dr. Stephen Lin in the dental diet talks about how if you are not getting vitamin K2, right, which comes from animal fat primarily, there are other sources, but then calcium doesn't necessarily get into your bones, and your arterial health can suffer, your dental health can suffer. And so, yeah, I mean, there are just, man, we could probably go on for a while here.
Yeah.
Jessica.
Yeah.
I'm jealous that you got to meet him.
Yeah, no, he was lovely. And I think that's why the low carb diets work. I don't necessarily think it's just because you've lowered carbs. I think it's because when you lower carbs, you prioritize these nutrient-dense animal foods that have the vitamin K2, that have the vitamin D, the vitamin E, the vitamin A, that have omega-3 fats, that have, B12, iron, these micronutrients that your body needs to function. I think they are easier to achieve, and naturally you will have more of them on a low carb diet. So I think there's a lot of indirect benefits to lowering your carbs. But with that said, I must say I still have seen a lot of clients who have put themselves on a low carb diet. They're fasting too much, over restricting calories, and they run into nutrient deficiencies too. So, I mean, again, it comes back to individualization, but yeah, increasing those animal foods, I think that has a lot of benefits for physical and mental health.
What does a Mannion say about like sun, steak, and steel?
Yep, that's what he likes to say. So he's big on the 3 S's. We got, man, 2 different triple S people here. Jessica, your story is incredible. We're really grateful for you sharing it here with us. I think it's really valuable for our listeners to just be aware of these various things about, focusing on eating a nutrient-dense diet, not getting too caught up in counting calories necessarily, or restricting calories too much, or even necessarily adhering to any specific diet, but just focusing on, eating healthy food for the most part.
Real food is good.
Yeah.
It sounds simple, but it's not necessarily easy. So I do just want to make sure I say that and we acknowledge that. I think it's really difficult for some people to be like, well, what is protein? How much protein should I have? Like, what are carbs? Like, it's easy for us to have these conversations and understand what that means. But not everybody has that level of knowledge. And so that's why I think it's great that, I mean, you guys are doing a podcast, I do a podcast, we share information on Instagram because we're trying to educate people and empower them as well.
Yeah.
I think one of the tricky things is that carb is a big umbrella, right? So when we talk about things as, when we talk about like low carb, we're not necessarily saying like low broccoli or low, onions, because a vegetable is a carbohydrate, and you can eat a lot of vegetables. It's very tough to overeat vegetables. I mean, you'd have to try at it like your hardest. Like it would have to be like your primary focus every day to, like put work aside and just focus on overeating vegetables. It's that tough. When we talk about low carb, we mean like low potato chip, low ice cream, low, other stuff that might give you trouble. And that's one of those things I think that gets sort of, that people bicker about in these internet debates. And unless there are people out there like Dr. Paul Saladino, who literally is telling people, vegetables have anti-nutrients and you should never eat them. And, but he's kind of an outlier. And I think most people generally agree that, as long as you're eating whole fruits and vegetables, you pretty much can't go wrong. So in terms of the carbohydrate intake.
Yeah, definitely. And usually that's usually where we start. So if we have patients that would benefit from a low carb diet, we don't get into like the nuances of carb quantities. We just give them a food list of like meats and healthy fats and fish and eggs and non-starchy vegetables, lower sugar fruits. And we just say, eat as much as you want. Prioritize these foods, eat as much as you want. We give them a bit of a guideline for structuring meals, but we don't even really focus on the foods that they're not including. We're mainly focusing on the foods we want them to eat more of.
Right.
And naturally that displaces the other stuff.
Because if you were to tell somebody don't eat potato chips, it's like telling somebody to not think about an elephant, right? All they can do is think about the elephant. All they can do is think about potato chips.
Totally. Like most people's problem is like snacking, snacking after dinner. Like I just can't stop eating chocolate or whatever it is after dinner. So then I just make them build up their dinner meal so big, so much protein, so much healthy fat, so many good quality vegetables and things like that, that they literally can't even think about or fit in anything after that. And I think a lot of times people, they're focusing on what they're taking away, and they're finding themselves in a situation where their body isn't getting enough energy. It's not getting enough protein. It's not getting enough nutrients. And so they do get driven physiologically towards these quick acting carbs because it's quick acting energy. So all of these things, we've got to ask ourselves, what is the body not getting? What is it missing that it needs? And that's kind of what we teach our clients.
Yeah, that's awesome.
So I just have one final question for you, Jessica, as we wrap up here. I'm curious if we have people listening to this episode who maybe, we've talked about some different things over the course of this interview. We've talked about disordered eating. We've talked about micronutrients and macronutrients. If somebody's listening to this episode and maybe they've thought in the past, maybe I'll go see a dietitian, but they haven't taken that step, what would you recommend for them?
Should they see a dietitian?
Well, yeah. I mean, what are the benefits of working with a dietitian, I guess?
Okay, well, not every dietitian is the same. So I guess, my personal experiences and my research have led me to practice in a particular way. And a lot of people resonate with that. And I know a lot of other dietitians do not work the same way that we do at our practice. So I can't speak for other dietitians, but for us and how we practice at Ellipse Health and the Center for Gastrointestinal Health, we are always focusing on the nutritional priorities of that individual sitting in front of us. And I think sometimes because I am talking a lot about low carbohydrate diets, I mean, my PhD is in low carb diets, people mistake that for, we just hand out low carb diets to everyone. But really our goal as dietitians is to teach people how to create their own diet and how to tweak their own diet depending on their own goals, their different stages of life. We want to give you all the tools so that you can, I guess, adjust and monitor your own diet throughout your own life and dependent on different things that might come your way. And we also encourage people to know how to interpret their own blood tests, to know what their different signs and symptoms mean. So it's not just about diet and what to eat. It's kind of more about understanding your body, understanding how you function and how you work, and understanding when to make changes. Because, even for myself, I don't just have it all figured out with diet. I'm constantly evaluating my health, what I'm doing, what makes me feel good, what doesn't. I'm sure you guys do the same. And I'm constantly adjusting based on the knowledge that I have. And to me, that is freedom. That is food freedom. Being able to understand what makes me feel good, and if something is not making me feel good anymore, knowing how to adjust it. And they're skills that we like to give our patients. And I think everyone can benefit from that.
So I have a question. What is your personal exercise routine?
My exercise routine? Well, I have a beautiful dog called Albus, and he's a golden retriever cross breed.
Albus Dumbledore?
Yes.
Got it. Making sure you're a nerd. I'm getting it. Okay.
Yeah. Well, I mean, I'm not the biggest Harry Potter nerd. My partner more is so, but he comes everywhere with us. And so whenever we're doing exercise, we're always trying to figure out how we can incorporate him. So whether that, we live really close to some beautiful beaches. So whether it's walking along the beach, running up and down the sand dunes of the beach, we also have this really, really steep hill in Terrigal near us that we do sprints up and down with Albus. He loves it. He has the best time. And I personally also do things like yoga. I love hot yoga. I've got a sauna at home as well. I love sweating. And I like to focus mainly on what we said before, the short, sharp, and sweet workout. So whenever I'm doing a workout per se, it needs to be short. It needs to be focused, because I do have a history of abusing exercise. And I used to be at the gym for 4 hours every single day. I used to overdo it. And so there are some negative associations with exercise, but if I keep it short, if I'm focused, if I have the goal of building muscle or de-stressing, being outside, getting sunlight, that it's a positive experience for me and it gives me a lot of joy.
Nice. We'll have to hook you up with some of our short, sharp, sweet workouts.
Sounds like a plan. Do you guys know of Dr. Richard Bernstein?
Sounds familiar. I might follow him online.
Yeah. Well, look, he's the oldest living person with type 1 diabetes.
Oh, that's why it's familiar, because you've talked about him in other interviews. That's right.
Probably, yeah. And he has this amazing book. You definitely should read it. And he talks it's called The Diabetes Solution. And he wrote it decades ago, I believe. He's in his 80s now, or maybe he's in his 90s. Anyway, and one of the things he talks about is, obviously the book is helping people control their blood sugars. And he talks a lot about resistance training. And he talks about how just doing one set to failure is the best approach for glycemic control and metabolic health. And it's interesting, you guys mentioned it as well. I know more and more people are getting into that, but it's just funny how, depending on what you're trying to get out of exercise, you might develop it a little bit differently. But the more that I look into the research and the more I look into just different individuals' health and lifestyle, the more I realize that people don't always have a healthy relationship with exercise. They don't really know why they're doing it. And they can put a lot of pressure on themselves to just exercise longer, not necessarily smarter. So the idea of getting more bang for your buck, doing one set instead of 3 sets, and that's actually more effective for your metabolic health. I think that's really interesting. I think more people should learn about that.
Yeah.
The way that we tend to put it is, do as many sets as you want, but just make sure you work as hard as you can in one of them, right? So my big question personally is how to get this stuff, better nutrition, better exercise recommendations, ingrained in policy. Because what people are told, that people look at the dietary recommendations. That's why we eat the way we eat, in part, and we should know how to really exercise efficiently. We should have, as Americans, and whatever, it doesn't matter what country you're in, but we should know how to get a great workout and how to make your body feel great in not, very much time, because people don't have very much spare time these days.
Exactly. 100%.
Or they certainly don't feel like they do, right? So
yeah, Totally.
Jessica, thank you so much for joining us on this evening over here and noon over there for you in Australia.
I'm gonna see if I can get my face back up here for a minute.
Well, we're kind of afternoon now, 2:00.
Yeah, so we're about to go to sleep pretty soon, and you're about to YOLO Friday night over there.
Yeah.
Pretty soon.
She's gonna grab Albus and hit it.
Hit the beach.
Absolutely. Well, thank you guys for having me. It's been a lovely chat, and hopefully your listeners got something out of that.
Yeah, for sure. Yeah.
Yes, it has been a lovely chat. I'm sure they will love it. Yeah, keep putting out that great Instagram stuff again for our listeners. Jessica Turton _dietitian on Instagram, and hopefully we will reconnect with you very soon.
Yeah, thanks again.
Thank you.
Absolutely. Hopefully we meet in person.
Boom, baby! What's up, people? Thank you so much for listening to this episode of
Truth, Not Trends.
That's right, right here at TNT Strength Headquarters, Truth Not Trends.
Please, if you enjoyed this episode, subscribe, rate, and review us on whatever platform you're listening to us on. And don't forget to share with a friend.
You can find us on the web at tntstrength.com.
That's right, TNT Strength now coming to you in person at 5255 College Avenue in Oakland, California. You can call the studio 510-768-5421. You can also text us at 855-796-9905.
Or shoot us an email at contact@tntstrength.com. And whatever you do, stay off of that stupid blue bubbly boasting.
Cappy's going to put that in the outtakes.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Mixed and edited by Desmond McNeese for We Mixed It, LLC. Go to whatsoundsawesome.com